Welcome to the show, Grace.
Thanks, Jason.
Good to see you. We recently met, and it was really a fun conversation, so I'm psyched to go a little deeper today.
Great. I'm happy to be here.
Yeah. How do you describe yourself when people say, "What are you up to in your life?" What's your answer to that?
I am a number of things. I'm a neurodiverse couples coach. I am also the director of couples and partner services at the Asperger Autism Network that's based in the Boston area. I'm also their director of the Neurodiverse Couples Institute, in which we train therapists how to work with neurodiverse couples.
Gotcha. So cool. And how did you get into that, what you're doing right now?
So about 20 years ago, I was a social work student in the Boston area, and I had an internship at a local college. And I had a student who I had the privilege of working with for a full year, and she baffled me. She baffled my supervisors. From week to week, she presented very differently. One week she seemed anxious, one week she seemed depressed, one week she might have seemed even bipolar. She had some issues with working with others. She always felt like they didn't live up to her standards. She was the only one pulling her weight. She also was obsessed with anime. She was an artist herself, and she wanted to just go to Japan and get a job working for an anime company. It was a very specific, deep interest of hers. And she had some very immature manners as well. Like she would wipe her nose with her sleeve. She would cry a lot. Eventually, I asked her why she was crying, and she said she was frustrated. She found communication difficult. She didn't understand why she didn't have friends. She seemed to just have like a long distance relationship, but she never really had close, intimate relationships. So she went off and graduated, and my next job out of social work school was to work in another college counseling center where there was a lot of support for students with all kinds of disabilities, including autism. And so I wanted to find out from someone if there was something I should know about autism and Asperger's, as it was called back then, and also to find out if the student might have had that. I was really curious, and I didn't know where to learn this. This is something that was not taught in school.
Yeah.
I happened to have a neighbor who had a daughter on the spectrum, and she was a social worker. And I asked her if she could meet with me, and I presented this student to her. And I asked, what do you think was a student on the spectrum? And she said, from what it sounded like, there were a lot of commonalities. Women present differently from men on the spectrum. So again, it was hard to get this information back then. So I asked her what I should know going forward in my next job, potentially working with students who might be on the spectrum. So as a way of answering the question, she invited me to her group for adults on the spectrum at what was then called the Asperger's Association of New England. And she said, they're the experts, learn directly from them. So she invited me to come in, and I talked with them, and they were great. They wanted to tell me all about their college experiences. Some were very good, some were not very good at all. And they wanted to share what they wish someone had been able to do with them in that position. So I kept coming back to her group to learn more. And eventually she asked me if I would co-lead her next group of adults on the spectrum with her. So I did that. And at the same time, there were lots of calls coming in from partners of people on the spectrum asking, what do you have for us? We need support. So AANE asked me to run groups for spouses of people on the spectrum. So I did that. And then the spouses asked, could we bring our partners in? Could we do couples groups? So I started doing couples groups. We got calls from everybody. We got calls from grandparents. Could you do a grandparents group? My grandson just got diagnosed, and my granddaughter just got diagnosed. So I started doing grandparents groups. We got calls from adult siblings saying, my parents are aging. I'm going to be the one to take care of my sibling on the spectrum. What do I need to know? So I started running siblings groups. But eventually I really honed in on the spouses and the couples. And that's really where my particular interest was. And then by now I had done that other job at the College Counseling Center, and I had worked for a mental health agency for a couple of years, and I got my license to be an independent clinical social worker. And I opened up my practice outside of the original college that I worked at, thinking I'll get all these referrals from them. And 99% of my referrals came from the Asperger's Association, because they didn't have other therapists to send adults to. Everyone who was working in the field back then really focused on kids. And there was really not this conception that, like, oh yeah, they grow up and they turn into adults and they still have a lot of the same challenges, and they still need people who understand them to work with them.
Yeah, amazing. Okay, let's define the term neurodiverse here. How do you describe that or define that?
Okay, that's a great question, and language is constantly changing. The way I use it in my work, it's specifically regarding people who have what I call an Asperger's autism profile. They may not meet the clinical definition for it in the DSM-5, but they have a lot of traits, and they maybe self-identify, or their spouse thinks that they're on the spectrum. So I like to say, okay, a neurodiverse couple is a couple where one or both partners resonate with having an Asperger autism profile. The term neurodiverse is meant to refer to a couple or a group of people. People tend to use it now to say my partner is neurodiverse, but a partner is really technically neurodivergent. And the partner who's not on the spectrum would be thought to say they are neurotypical. But a lot of people don't like that terminology, because that can imply there's something not normal about a person on the spectrum. And the whole movement of neurodiversity is really around there's no better or worse neurology. Each neurology comes with their own set of strengths and challenges. It's just a difference, and it's a natural difference. It's not a disorder. It's not a condition. It's not something to be fixed and cured. It is just to be learned about and lived with and learned and understood by society more, so that it'd be easier to manage life.
Yeah, I love that. Now, I noticed you didn't include ADHD or ADD. I know in some
people,
do you include that or?
So some people do include that as part of being neurodivergent. Some people will include bipolar as being neurodivergent. But the work I do is very specific to people who have an Asperger's autism profile. So any questions you ask me about my experience will be about that population.
Okay, cool. So we're not going to dive into ADHD.
It is a very common co-occurring condition for people on the spectrum, as is anxiety, depression, PTSD, sleep issues, gastrointestinal issues. But that's not my area of expertise, the ADD as much as the Asperger's.
Cool. We're going to get into defining this Asperger's autism spectrum, and people, when they say he's on the spectrum or she's on the spectrum, we want to be clear about what that is. So let's do that. And then we'll dive into how this impacts our relationships. More and more, we have students coming to the relationship school that self-identify as on the spectrum, usually more on the Asperger's side than the autistic side. And it's been really interesting, honestly, for me over the years, because I, like you, I was trained, in counseling and psychology, but I'd never once had a class on this, never even a mention, honestly. And then I worked at a mental health center for 3 years too, and still no mention. And I worked in various wilderness therapy programs, and I was a family therapist, and still no mention. So this is a very new, kind of newly emerging phenomena that's going on. And you said, I think on our call the other day, 1 in 300 something people are, what did you say, labeled as, or or identify as neurodiverse or
Yeah,
divergent?
that was 20 years ago. Now it's 1 out of 48.
1 out of 48. I mean, that is so intense. 1 out of 48. Okay. So will you define Asperger's and autism and the quote spectrum?
I'm not sure I can. I can tell you a little bit about it. So there's the DSM-5, which has all of the criteria for mental health conditions and some neurological conditions and a few other things. And the most recent version took out the word Asperger's.
Oh, really?
And yeah, it's only listed as a little footnote that if you had a previous diagnosis of Asperger's, you were now considered to have autism spectrum disorder.
Okay.
And so there are different levels of autism spectrum disorder, levels 1, 2, and 3. And that relates to how much support a person needs. And so some people refer to ASD level 1 is what Asperger's used to be. Someone would have been given an Asperger's diagnosis. But some people think that Asperger's is different from autism. Some people think it's the same spectrum. The
Mhm.
reason why the term spectrum is used is because it's such a wide range of presentations. You
Yeah.
could have you can have autism spectrum disorder and be very social. You could be an extrovert or you could be an introvert too. You could be both things at different times, or depending on what you're talking about. If you're talking about a special interest you have, you may be very, very verbal about it. And if you're not talking about something you're comfortable talking about, you may give one word answers. So it's very varied. You can be a hoarder, you could be a minimalist, you could have a 180-degree difference on so many traits. You could be a good, big picture thinker, or you could be very detailed. So because of this range, they try to come up with criteria
Yeah,
that fit all the people who they needed to put under this big umbrella.
totally. And it's limited, right? We both know that any diagnosis is limited.
Yes.
Yeah. And I think of the spectrum, you tell me if this is accurate or not. I think of Asperger's as sort of mild and autism as more extreme. Is that inaccurate to say that?
So you could
Especially in the context of relationships and social dynamics.
have Asperger's and there could be nothing mild about it.
Okay.
It could greatly impact you, even though it's not the level 3 ASD. So it's very varied again because a lot depends on your sensory overload. If a person on the spectrum is stressed, or if they are experiencing a sensory sensitivity, or if they have sensory overload, they can be very dysfunctional. And the same person, when they're in a good place, emotionally and physically, can be, a CEO of a company and get, or whatever it is, be very high functioning.
Yeah.
And also the terminology high functioning is not well regarded in the community because it implies that there are some biases as to what society views as valuable.
Totally.
And
It's so subjective, right? What's high functioning and what's low functioning. And it's kind of judgy too. People don't like that.
yeah, and you could be nonverbal, but be incredibly intelligent. So, in fact, most people with Asperger's autism do present as higher than average intelligence, except for the group of people on the spectrum who are lower IQ. So it's a huge spectrum, and there is no easy way to diagnose it either. There's no blood test. There's no MRI.
It's not a simple 5-question quiz.
Right.
I had a friend recently do the test, and it was like a 2-week process, full on. It was really rigorous.
And I hope that if your friend had an intimate partner, that they were included in that process in some way, because what happens often is, at least the clients that I see, they will say that the traits don't appear anyplace else in their life except with their intimate partner. So they're very successful at work. They have no problems communicating in their field. They have no problems with managing their time at work or whatever. But when it comes to home life and intimacy and relationships, it's a whole nother situation.
Yeah, completely. Okay, so let's come back to the definitions of Asperger's and autism. Would you say if there was one distinguishing difference between those two, is there one that stands out?
What I would say is it's really how the client wants to self-identify. I go with their language. There was some issues as well around the use of the name Asperger's, because it's named after a man, Hans Asperger, who was in Vienna during World War II, and there was some connection, but whether he was helping the Nazis or not was unclear for a while. Now it seems like maybe he was, and so some people want to distance themselves from that label because of that association.
Yeah, makes sense. That would be very understandable, especially if I'm a woman. Another thing named after a man, that's all we need in the world. So I'm thinking of trying to think of the listener here. So here they are listening to this. Okay, neurodivergence. I get there's Asperger's and autism, but is there any distinguishable thing that would have them go, oh, I'm more autistic than I am Asperger's, or I'm more Asperger's than I am autistic? Is there anything that stands out by way of like features or
I don't think
one feels or?
Yeah, I don't think anymore. I think in the previous DSM-4, they distinguished between Asperger's and autism, and there was one of the criteria that was different was delayed language, the amount of delay of your language as a baby and a child. That was a distinguishing feature. But I think now it's all under the same umbrella.
Okay.
And, people use the terminology interchangeably.
So they're kind of synonymous now.
For some people they are, and for some people who were given the diagnosis of Asperger's, they would say some feel that they're not autistic, that it is different for them. And so you have a community of people with a lot of opinions on this. And A&E has a link on their webpage about language and about the language of the community. And we've surveyed people as to what they want to be called and like to be called and feel that they relate to. And this, like I said, it's an ever-changing conversation.
Okay. So we're going to use them in this episode interchangeably. Let's do that. Just, I might use them interchangeably, but if at any point you feel like that's out of context or something, let me know. Okay.
Sure.
All right. And I think one of the things in my limited experience with people on the spectrum over the years has been relationships. There's a relationship challenge, social challenge, awkwardness socially. There's a trouble fitting in, both for young people like children in peer groups, but also for adults in peer groups, as well as in an intimate relationship. There can be a real difficulty for some folks on the spectrum empathizing with their partner, for example, right? Or reading their face. They have a hard time reading faces. So will you talk about a few of these things that start to become challenging relationally for the one who is neurodivergent?
Sure. It's actually challenging for both. I was giving a couples group last night, and this was a topic we were discussing. It's very hard for couples who are neurologically different to understand each other's facial expressions. And oftentimes, the typical example is that the neurotypical partner may even be crying, and the partner on the spectrum does not understand what that means or even notices, perhaps, and then doesn't communicate in a way that feels comforting. The neurotypical partner often thinks that the partner on the spectrum is angry. They often have a face that looks very downward with their features, and they can be in a perfectly pleasant mood, but their face will look like they're scowling sometimes. And so often my clients will say, people are always asking them, why are you mad? And they're like, I'm not mad. But then they get mad when they're being told that they're mad. Sometimes their partner thinks that it's just that the neurodivergent partner doesn't know what they're feeling. So they think that they know better, that their partner is actually mad, but maybe the partner does, maybe they don't know. Some do have co-occurring alexithymia, which means they don't know their feelings.
Yeah.
Some will recognize the big feelings like anger or happiness or sadness, but maybe not. Others will recognize, the nuances of feeling. So again, there's always a variety. But a lot of times with couples, this gets them into trouble because when you see somebody, the first thing you see is their being, their facial expression, their body posture, and you very quickly make an assessment. Is this person in a good mood or a bad mood? And then you're going to act accordingly. You change your behavior a bit. If you think your partner's in a bad mood, you may choose to avoid them.
Yeah. And that's true with most couples. Yep.
Or you may choose to be empathic and try to find out what's wrong. But if nothing's wrong, that conversation becomes a problem instead of being, a connecting moment. So most of the time, my clients in couples are misreading each other. And so as a neurodiverse couples coach, I come up with a lot of tools and strategies that are very concrete. And I came up with a tool. I didn't invent the 1 to 5 scale, but I use the 1 to 5 scale to describe feelings. And so I'll often say, for starters, like on a scale of 1 to 5 for negativity, where are you? On a scale of 1 to 5 for positivity, where are you? And that's language they can use with each other. On a scale of 1 to 5 for anxiety or stress or tiredness or hunger or joy or excitement. And so a lot of times when people have a hard time putting their feelings into words, they can hone in on a number on a numerical scale much more easily. And that information is helpful to convey in both directions, because sometimes I'll get people who think that their partner is furious with them. But if you ask them on a scale of 1 to 5, where are you? They'll say like a 2. And so it's not that they're not picking up something that's really there. They are angry, but it's more like a mild irritation and annoyance. It's not rage, but it registers sometimes to the partner as rage. And that can be scary for some couples.
Totally. So if you were to say the single biggest problem for a partnership where there's one person who's neurotypical and one person who's neurodivergent, what would you say the biggest, single biggest complaint is or challenge?
I think the biggest challenge is that they are making assumptions about each other that are not true. And they are moving forward as if those assumptions are true.
And making assumptions about feelings or content?
Both.
Okay.
All kinds of things. Because communication is a difficulty for many people on the spectrum, there are certain trends, like people on spectrum will say they want to be efficient with their words, and they try often to give one-word answers or very short answers. And that leaves so much unsaid that their partner is filling in the blanks with assumptions. It also can sound very terse or rude sometimes. So they really need to, work with that, check out assumptions and ask, for more information. And also, there's this big difference in how they communicate. Most of the time, people on the spectrum are communicating to exchange information. That's what feels connecting to them, to share all of the great information and knowledge that they have, to be helpful, or to gather information about someone. But for most people who are neurotypical, every communication with their partner is a bid for connection. And they're looking for this emotional connection piece that the partner spectrum often doesn't even know is
pick up on or
yeah, exactly. And so what happens then is a lot of disappointment and unmet needs and unmet expectations. And that can lead either partner to feel like their partner doesn't care about them. And then they, wonder what they did wrong. And some respond with hurt, some respond with anger, some respond by withdrawing, some respond by criticizing. So it's tricky.
Hey there, do you want to become a much better communicator? Do you want to build a secure relationship? And do you want to accept yourself more? If you want those three things, come join our Relationship Mastery course. This course is unreal, okay? 9-month journey, deep dive into you, how relationships work, and how to do them well. Check it out from one of our past graduates, Casey.
As an entrepreneur, I face a lot of my time looking at myself and what I'm doing and how to improve my business. And I was feeling like I was hitting walls personally and professionally. And those walls weren't like skills, like business skills. They were like interpersonal issues. They were the things that were keeping me up at night. It was the frustration that I felt. It was sweating. It was the tension. And it was like not knowing this stuff. So I enrolled in Deeper 9 months ago and just kind of had my life dramatically shifted. I got in touch with myself in a way that I've never been in touch with myself before. My whole life I've been striving and working and building and growing, but all of those things felt like exterior and none of it felt interior. Deeper broke that shell open, and it feels like I'm like peeling apart this armor that I've built to get an understanding of who I am, understanding that these emotions I felt were anxiety, and I could find where that anxiety lives in my body and what to do with it and how to see the triggers in my life that cause it and create space between those triggering events and the actual emotion. Jason talks about this core human split between who I am and who I act as in order to get love and care and attachment. And it's about closing that gap. And through Deeper, I learned skills and tools to apply to that part of me, tools that help my marriage. Our arguments are short-lived. We resolve them quickly. To say it's been life-changing feels trite, but I don't know how else to describe this and how powerful it is. I'm just feeling more secure in who I am and what I'm doing, and how that reflects in business is that I'm establishing better boundaries to support myself. I'm not feeling as emotional around the ups and downs of business, which has been huge for my well-being. It's just like touching to be around people that care, that want to be part of the conversation and support me and push me along. You can't change your life in 2 days. When I started going to the gym, it's not like I got fit in a weekend. 9 months is a pretty solid course. I don't know anyone else. And I've looked, right? I've gone through live events and audio programs and read books and attended conferences, and no one has this education that Jason has. Jason offers a step-by-step approach that helped me see who I am and how I show up and why I show up that way, and give me the choice to change my behaviors based on changing my values, change my relationship by creating new agreements, and have the relationship that I want.
All right, Casey and Adelaide, his wife, now they have a baby. Their marriage is doing awesome because they really applied themselves in this course. Go to relationshipschool.com/relationship mastery if you want in on the action. I'm thinking of a couple that I was involved in one of our courses a while back, and one partner was pretty furious that the other partner just wasn't getting it. And the partner that wasn't getting it had a formal diagnosis of Asperger's. And I think they were genuinely working hard to figure this out. But the partner that was hurt and angry, who was neurotypical, kept trying to get their partner to like get it. Like, I just want you to get it. Why won't you like validate my feelings? Why won't you empathize with me? Why won't you? And it felt, over time, I was like, wait, I think you're asking this person to do something they literally can't do. So is that true? Or can a person, say with an Asperger's diagnosis, who's not a feeler and is a big time thinker and factual kind of like data processor, can that person learn to feel and empathize over time?
So I would say people on the spectrum do have empathy, and they often feel very deeply, and they have to sometimes distance themselves from certain things so they don't get overwhelmed and shut down by their feelings. The part that gets in the way of the relationship is that they don't communicate empathically in a way that their partner is looking for. So, for example, they may try to feel their partner's feelings. And I'm always telling couples, the goal is not to feel the other person's feelings. If they're sad because they lost a parent, or something, they're sad about something in their life, or they're frustrated at work, you're not supposed to take on their feelings. You're supposed to communicate with them in a way that shows you are interested in their feelings and you are trying to understand their feelings, and that you allow the space to listen to their feelings and, hold their feelings, so to speak. But you're not supposed to feel their feelings. So I think that what I do as a coach is I teach scripts and formats and, rules and tools to approximate a natural response that the neurotypical partner might be looking for. Now, sometimes people on the spectrum also want this kind of response. Sometimes they don't. So I'm always constantly checking in with both partners. What's this like for you? How do we tweak this tool to make it be what you want? But there is a tool that I, developed called an empathic response, which is basically, how do you listen to your partner tell a story? And then what is your line or two to say that then keeps the conversation moving forward? You're not solving their problems. You're not judging them.
What would be an example of an empathic response?
So let's say a partner is telling you that they had a really tough day at work.
Yeah,
and
work was brutal today. My boss was so mean. It was just awful. I feel like quitting.
It sounds like you had a really stressful time. You're there trying to do your job, and your boss is being mean to you. It just makes it harder. Is that right? So that would be, so you listen, you say what you think, you take a guess in your own words, what you think your partner's feeling, and you ask if that's right. You could be completely wrong, and that's still okay, because what you're doing is you're showing interest and you're giving permission to the other person to talk more about their feelings. And they may go on and say, you know what, it really wasn't so much that it was stressful, but it made me realize I don't want to be in that environment anymore. I don't need to be talked to in a mean way. It made me really, really uncomfortable. And I think I might look for another job, so it helps the person who's talking process and move forward
totally.
in their pace. And, the other person is there supporting in a supporting role, basically. And at the end of, the conversation, the partner can offer, is there anything I can do to help? Or they can offer just some words of reassurance. It sounds like you're doing a really good job in a really tough environment, so they can say something connecting like that. And that feels good. And usually people on the spectrum are relieved to learn this tool, because otherwise they just don't know what to say. So they either don't say anything, which makes the other partner feel invisible, or they say the wrong thing, like what you said, try to fix it. And that's upsetting. Because
And now, are there cases, Grace, where this doesn't work for whatever reason? Maybe the person on the spectrum is incapable of the tool, or they do the tool, but it sounds kind of formulaic and it doesn't actually feel like a genuine response. And so do you find, I'm just sort of assuming that you would find from time to time, even the best communication tools fall short.
So great question about the formulaic aspect. Sometimes it sounds very formulaic at the beginning, but with practice, it gets more authentic sounding, and it sort of gets a little bit easier for both people. It becomes more organic. The role of the tools is to eventually be incorporated into their normal repertoire a bit more. And they're kind of like training wheels that come off at some point. But at least for starters, they usually bring a lot of relief because at least they are now the couple that didn't really speak the same language and now is developing their own language of connection with these tools. And that way they have a way to kind of bridge the neurological divide there in terms of their needs and expectations. But to your question about, is it ever impossible for someone to do something? It really depends on their motivation. And a lot of couples do come to see me as sort of a last ditch effort to save their relationship. And they really want to save their relationship. So if they really want to save their relationship and they're willing to work at the tools and schedule them and practice them, then they can make a lot of progress. Occasionally, I may meet with somebody who just can't do it in the way their partner wants it. And their partner may decide to say, you know what? I don't need this from them anymore. I'm going to get my empathic responses from my friends, my family, and I'm just going to look to my partner for other things that they can do.
Yeah. Now, here's what makes it tricky. The conversation is there's, as you know, as a couples coach, there's a myriad of other issues they haven't probably dealt with, or there's childhood trauma. There's, whatever family of origin blueprint you got about how to do relationship. There's how you both do conflict. There's the stressors of life. There's physical and mental health problems that could be, compounding this. So how do you parse some of this stuff out? Because we could be talking actually about any normal couple here, because any normal couple needs tools and needs to learn how to offer an empathic response, right?
Agreed.
So I'm curious how you parse out, like, what is actually a neurodivergent issue from all the normal challenges we have as couples?
So the tools that I came up with would help any couple, but the tools that a traditional therapist who doesn't know about spectrum issues, the tools that they come up with will not help a neurodiverse couple, because they may say to the person on the spectrum, not even knowing that they're on the spectrum, they may say, go home and show your wife more empathy or show your husband more empathy, but they don't tell them how to do that. And so there may be lots of other issues going on, but the real difference in what I teach the therapists through the Neurodiverse Couples Institute at A&E to work with neurodiverse couples is really to act as an interpreter, because they really do need to understand what is being heard and what isn't, and how to make each partner understand that the other person does have good intentions, is doing their best, does care about their partner, even though their actions through their own lens would show the opposite. So a lot of the work is around interpreting, and a lot of it is around concrete tools and strategies. Now, if there are also, let's say, trauma, you're going to have to do the work and therapy around the trauma, but that's probably individual work, the childhood stuff, so you might need to have a couple do their own individual therapy too, like maybe anger management work, or maybe, some EMDR or something. But it's still always important to work with a therapist who knows about the spectrum issues, because if you, even doing EMDR, my understanding is it's different when you are working with a person on the spectrum, because they have such a visual autobiographical memory, and they get locked in, and they could have obsessive thoughts or ruminate or perseverate on things. You really don't want to re-traumatize them by bringing up stuff and, getting them stuck in a place. So you really might want to do more work around the skill building piece. How do you help regulate their emotions and move forward with some of this? Okay.
I've got a few listener questions here. I want to do some rapid fire questions at you if you're open to it.
Sure.
But before I do that, are there emerging certifications coaches and therapists can get that say, hey, I'm now qualified to work with neurodivergent people?
Yeah. So in terms of, I'll answer that in terms of the couple. So the Asperger Autism Network, where I'm the director of the Neurodiverse Couples Institute, we give a certification to the therapists that come through our training. They could be coaches, they could be any type of clinician. And so we have one self-paced course for 10 hours online. That's the basics. It's called Training 101, Fundamentals of Working with Neurodiverse Couples in Therapy. And then we have an advanced class called Certification 201, Case Presentations and Advanced Topics in Neurodiverse Couples Therapy. That second class meets over Zoom with me for 8 weekly sessions for 90 minutes. At the end of both of those classes, they have to take a test. They have to submit an audio of a session, or we supply a role play for a session. And then assuming they've met all the criteria, we give them a training and a certification certificate that they can then post on their website, or, say that they are AANE trained and certified to work with neurodiverse couples.
And I'm assuming these are popping up all over the place in terms of opportunities for coaches and therapists to get more training. That'd be a guess, because this is kind of this burgeoning field.
Yeah, I don't know anyone else who's doing this, though, for couples.
Okay, cool.
For neurodiverse couples, I think we're the only ones. We have had about 100 therapists go through our, advanced training, and then we populate a map on our website so people can log on and find them. And people have come to us from Australia, Europe, a lot of different places, Mexico, and then throughout the United States. But we still have a lot of states in the U.S. where we have nobody trained. So if anybody out there listening is at all interested, we would love to train more people and refer more people, because we're asked for tons of referrals on a daily basis.
Oh, that's so cool. Great. We'll make sure we put that link in the show notes. Yeah, that's great. We have a lot of coaches and therapists that follow the podcast, so that'll be helpful. All right. You up for really short answers? The shorter your answer, the more questions I can give you.
Sure.
Okay. Because I know you probably could unpack each one quite a lot. Here's one that got the most kind of likes and comments, which is from Christina. Christina says, I feel like it's become the issue du jour. I'm so confused about what is legitimately a neurodiversity versus being a person with a collection of all our learnings and propensities and traumas and coping mechanisms and defenses. When is someone legit neurodiverse versus just who they are? Or is it a clinical thing? Aspects, ADHD, whatever. I'm sure the answer isn't black and white. I'm sure they feed each other. But I'm so tired of this topic in a way, but I want to be a good partner and understand. It just seems overwhelming and unknowable right now. What would you say?
So there is specific criteria. There are diagnosticians out there who evaluate for ASD. So it is a real thing. And you can get tested for it if someone wants to. And A&E has referrals for diagnosticians if people are interested.
Okay. And A&E, what's the website again?
AANE.org.
And they can get find someone locally or virtually to do formal testing.
Yeah.
Yeah, amazing. I think that's kind of the answer, right? Is like, look, if you're not sure and you're kind of wondering about what's going on here, get a test. I mean, I recently had a friend tell me he got a test and he said it was very liberating for him, right? Mm-hmm. He started to connect some dots for their relationship and made his life make more sense.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay. Here's another one from Leah. I imagine the strategies are as diverse as the individuals in the relationship. And number one, what can a neurotypical-ish woman do to support her ADHD man? And then that's more ADHD. Two, is there a down and dirty street level way of suggesting and highlighting the importance of empathy to a neurodivergent partner, or some scripting that might help a couple in this situation? And you offered one already.
Yeah. And just having both people understand that what feels connecting to one person might not be the same thing that feels connecting to the other. Like the neurodivergent partner might need downtime and time with his or her special interest to feel comfortable to then be able to be intimate with their partner, where the other person wants the time together of connecting and talking and not separate times. So sometimes they want absolutely opposite things, and it's about negotiation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
The question about the ADHD, though, there's a lot of executive function challenges with ADHD and with Asperger's or autism. And so it's really about how do you support a person with executive function challenges. Sometimes you need to schedule things and have lots of reminders. Sometimes you need one person to be sort of the project manager and be the list giver. So there's lots of different ways of coming up with strategies to help when there are those kinds of attention deficit issues or executive functioning issues.
Okay, cool. Great. Just kind of skimming. I mean, the big one that keeps coming up is from Barbara here, how do neurodivergents to communicate feelings and show empathy? How can neurotypicals learn to speak their language?
So what I often teach are tools that are not natural for either partner, but they do the tool and that gives them their own language. So it really is about neither partner is changing into the other type of person. You're just changing some behaviors, you're learning some tools, and hopefully that allows the good intentions and the love that these couples have to flow in both directions.
Nice. From Jessica, suggestions for neurodiverse partners to develop awareness to unhelpful habits, maybe some typical scenarios that are common and a bit of what's under all of that for both partners.
So sometimes people on the spectrum will have what's called a stim. It may be a habit, it may be a physical gesture, it may be rocking or flapping hands or twirling hair or pulling out a beard or something.
You called it a stim?
Stim.
Is it is it synonymous with a tic, or is that different?
No, it's a self-stimulatory behavior that's meant to increase comfort and decrease anxiety. And it's not necessarily something to discourage. You may have to have someone do something that's more socially appropriate in a certain setting. But if they need to fidget with something, there's lots of fidget toys out there these days to keep people, moving with their hands or something. But if there's an annoying behavior that either partner in a relationship has, that's another tool I have about how do you bring it up? And it's a good thing to bring up, because if you don't bring it up, person doesn't know and they're going to keep doing it. So, again, it's always about both people in the relationship trying to communicate what they need and ask for it in a way that doesn't feel critical, but rather helpful. And then can a person change a behavior? It's hard, but there are ways of doing it. You have to figure out what purpose was that behavior serving, and what could replace it, and what would be a better solution for that particular couple.
Yeah. I know a lot of, especially ADHD folks can certainly fidget a lot and have these stims. So you called them. It's a cool term. I haven't heard that. And taking it away, it can be really problematic, because it's like, no, that's the thing that helps me. So I like that you're saying replace it perhaps with something less annoying for the partner or whatever. Yeah. Okay, here's one that is kind of a question of mine too from Amy. How to know they are neurodiverse when they don't know? And my follow-up question is, if you have a feeling or a sense with a family member, a friend, a client, what is a tactful way to bring this up and suggest they might want to look at this?
So some people will start by asking some questions of the person that, if the answer is yes to a lot of these questions, then you may end up saying, a lot of those things are part of being on the spectrum. Is that something you've ever heard about, or something anyone in your family has ever, been diagnosed with? Is it something you're interested in? You may start asking the person things about their strengths first and then get to their challenges, because a lot of their strengths may also be because they are on the spectrum.
Yeah.
And so, it's always nice to bring things up in a positive way. One way not to do it is what some spouses or partners do by just because it comes out of frustration, is they may say things like, you can't possibly understand this because you're on the spectrum. You don't ever want to bring something up in a shaming way.
Yeah.
Then who would want to have something that's, that's that. But sometimes people will find a particular podcast or a TV show with a character who's identified as being on the spectrum, or a book or an article that really sounds like that person, a lot of the same traits. And they may share that, and they may say, when I read this or heard about this, I thought, maybe this could be what's going on with you. What do you think? So there are some different ideas, and some people don't take it well. Some people are thrilled to learn about it. Like you said, your friend was relieved. It can make a lot of sense from a person's whole life of challenges and strengths. And so you just really don't know how it's going to go over. It's also not one conversation. Like, a person may have a negative reaction initially, but then over time, they may come to realize that there might be something to it. And so they may soften on the idea or get interested in it.
Okay. Here's one from me, a short one that I just thought of. How do you distinguish the difference between insecure avoidant attachment kind of issues and injuries versus neurodiversity? Because they can look potentially very similar.
I don't try to figure out what is the root, because now that I do coaching, I just move forward. We're here about the future. Here's some strategies to try. Let's see where it goes.
Yeah, and I think that was probably a conscious choice of yours. So what had you move in that direction? Not so much for coaching, but for let's just talk about how we're going to solve the problem and not worry so much about where it came from. What had you change your thinking there?
Yeah. So when I started my private practice and I was still doing therapy with couples, they were coming to me after being to maybe 5 or 6 or even 12 couples therapists before me.
Yeah.
And what they weren't getting were tools and strategies. And so I thought, let's just give them that. And that is what they seem to want. And I hear daily from from clients who are thankful that finally someone's teaching them how to do something to make progress going forward. It's for some people, they do need to understand, or they like to understand, but that still doesn't teach them what to do differently. So that's why I like doing coaching now.
Cool. What's your favorite book or podcast or resource for this conversation right now?
A book that a lot of people seem to like is David Finch's Journal of Best Practices. There's also a book by Joanna Pike called Neurodiverse Relationships, where Tony Atwood weighs in on each topic that she discusses with some explanation of the neurologies. I think that books that are not so negative are really much better. There's some negative books out there that are really written by angry partners. And if someone read them, who would want to have what's being described in the book? I think it's a barrier. It might help someone because it might help a neurotypical partner who's feeling that anger, because then they feel understood, and they feel
less alone. Sure.
They feel less alone. So there is a place for that as well. But when I'm working with a couple, I'd rather tell them to go watch a series like Love on the Spectrum or Atypical, or Parenthood is an older one, but something even like The Good Doctor, something that shows a character on the spectrum, but that then they could have a conversation about. Do they relate to that character? Are they same or different? And we made a course at A&E. I made a course for A&E called 101 for Couples, in which I interview 9 neurodiverse couples. And it's almost like a series, like a docuseries in a way. Cool. Because then they could watch the couples together and they can decide, like, hey, do you relate to what either partner is saying here? How are we the same? How are we different? And that gives the feeling again of not being alone with it all.
Yeah, that's awesome. Okay. Great. Well, Grace, I'm aware of the time, so let's start wrapping up. Where do we find you and the aane.org? I guess that's their site. Where do we find you?
gracemyhill.com. And
Okay.
it talks about the couples coaching I do, the groups I do for one or both partners together separately. It has some podcasts that I've been interviewed on there as well, and some articles that I've written there as well. And the professional training, there are links there back to the Neurodiverse Couples Institute through A&E.
Okay, great. Awesome. And I always ask this to my guests because one of our missions here is to reach young people with relationship education. If I had a room of 1,000 high schoolers and I could only teach them one thing about love or relationships, what would you, and you were whispering in my ear, what would you want me to tell them?
I would tell them to ask questions of their partner to better understand them.
Yeah. Simple. Good. Love it. Great. Well, cool, Grace. Thanks a lot for your time and for all your experience here. Really appreciate it. It's going to help a lot of people.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me.
Okay, here's your action step. If you are curious about neurodivergence, I want you to highlight what stood out the most in this interview. What was the thing that you got the most out of? And perhaps it was just the empathy example that she shared, right? Really trying to do the technical aspect of empathy, maybe less about the feeling aspect of empathy, although I think that goes a longer way and has a deeper impact. I still feel like we can empathize with our partner even when we're, quote, not very good at empathy, okay? And then practice it. Practice one empathic statement to your partner and just see how it goes. And then have a context and a shared reality together that, hey, we want to do more of this in our relationship. I want to try to respond to you more empathically, honey, or friend, or boss, or whoever, okay? Awesome. All right. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you all on the flip side. As you know, I've dedicated my life to helping people with their relationships, right? I want to solve this problem so that all of you can work through your differences and have fulfilling, amazing, badass partnerships and relationships, family, coworkers, friends, whoever. And I have trained a ton of relationship coaches, almost 100 certified relationship coaches, to help you specifically work through your relationship challenges. So I want to invite you to a special deal we're offering to the podcast listener where you can get 50% off your first month of coaching with one of our amazing relationship coaches. Okay, if you're tired of therapy, it feels like that's going around in a circle, or you want to actually set goals and accomplish your relationship goals, hire a relationship coach. Okay, go to relationshipschool.com/get coaching now, and then use the coupon code FIRST50 to get the 50% deal off your first month of relationship coaching. Super psyched to have our amazing coaches serve you and help you get to the next level. Hey, thanks so much for listening. Please subscribe to this YouTube channel. Share one of these videos with a friend. We want to help the planet get their act together around relationships, and you are one of them, so thank you.